Welcome to the Indian Council of World Affairs, India's oldest foreign policy think tank.
Many people interested in foreign policy have told me when they come to the Indian Council of World Affairs in Sapru House, they feel a great sense of affinity with this institution because this was where the serious study of international relations in India all began.
The ICWA was set up by a small group of public intellectuals some years before our independence, because they felt it important that India have an independent perspective on international affairs. Since then, the ICWA has gone from strength to strength, and it has been a long journey, almost 75 years. One particular milestone in that journey was in 2001, when the Indian Parliament passed an act declaring the ICWA to be an institution of national importance. We thus became a publicly funded independent think tank. Our governing council is headed by the Vice President of India, and the External Affairs Minister is its Vice President. We have three focus areas. The first is research, which is carried out by an in-house faculty. Very rigorous research on different parts of the world, encompassing the domain of area studies.
The Council has been very proactive in conducting dialogue and discussion on African affairs and India-Africa relations in order to promote an understanding on African affairs in India, an Indian perspective on Africa, given the priority that now Africa has in Indian foreign policy.
Within the Council, we have a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. So we're looking through our studies to find new areas of cooperation such as renewable energy, climate change and the space technology.
Interacting with leading experts, diplomats, media persons and academicians has helped me nurture my research further.
We recently had the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook, which has a lot of convergence with the India's own Indo-Pacific construct.
The learning curve at the Council has been tremendous, and it provides a strong foundation for my future research.
The second is policy. Because we are a think tank, and being close to policy, commenting on policy, and helping formulate policy is an essential part of our functioning.
I think in the new age, what we're seeing much more of is that people want to be involved in foreign policy thinking. They want to have a voice. Now, this is where ICWA comes in.
This is the platform where I, for many years, have come and interacted with the best in the world.
ICWA provides a valued platform for visiting foreign dignitaries to interact with informed Indian audiences. The third is outreach. This is most important because of our role as a public-funded independent think tank, and we carry this out by associating ourselves with as wide an audience in India as is possible. Colleges, universities, other think tanks, and of course with similar institutions elsewhere in the world.
What I would call the democratization of Indian foreign policy. That it has moved to distant corners of the country. It is no longer a preserve of Delhi.
ICWA has a robust publications program which includes papers by the in-house faculty, invited papers and commentaries, and books on foreign affairs by not only former diplomats and established academics but also by upcoming scholars. Our journal, India Quarterly, is being published since 1945. ICWA's publications are also being translated into various Indian languages. What is ICWA's role as we move into the future? The vision of the institution is to stay abreast of all the momentous changes taking place in the domain of foreign policy. New areas are emerging. There are strategic technologies, there is climate change, there is artificial intelligence, and there is cyber security. How can our research faculty and the audiences that come here be better informed about developments in these areas? How can we write and formulate research papers to give policy inputs that help in government policy formulation? These are the emerging challenges for ICWA and form a part of our vision for the future.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all the participants. I am Athar Zafar, Research Fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs. On behalf of the Council, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the online book launch, The South Caucasus Transition from Subjugation to Independence by Ambassador Achal Malhotra, and a panel discussion on the Nagorno-Karabakh imbroglio. Allow me to brief you about the program and introduce you our distinguished guests to the session. Today's program is chaired by Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Distinguished Fellow, VIF, New Delhi. The program will begin with e-launch of the book and presentation by Ambassador Achal Malhotra. It will be followed by remarks by the chair, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Distinguished Fellow, VIF, New Delhi. Then Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey, Jawaharalal Nehru University, New Delhi, will make his observations. It will be followed by remarks by Dr. Anita Sengupta, Director, Asia in Global Affairs, Kolkata. A brief intervention will be made by me then. The chair will then moderate the Q&A, which will be of about 20 minutes. The program will conclude with a vote of thanks by me. Some house rules are to be mentioned. Questions can be asked live by typing in the chat box provided below the video panel. Chat can be initiated by logging into chat as a guest option provided at the bottom of the chat window, wherein you can enter your name and then accept the terms and conditions to start chatting. Panelists will respond during Q&A session, and moderator will try to take all the questions as feasible. It is requested that questions and observations should be brief and to the point. Thank you. May I now request Ambassador Anil Trigunayat to conduct the proceedings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Athar Zafar, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, Director General ICWA, distinguished panelists, dear friends on the virtual platforms. I'm indeed thankful to the ICWA for not only commissioning but also expeditiously releasing this fabulous and rich treatise by Ambassador Achal Malhotra on a complex and conflict-ridden region. I have read it once and must read it again. I want to convey my heartiest congratulations to Ambassador Malhotra for your exemplary book that has tremendous referral value and a long shelf life. Your erudition and your experience are the hallmark in this work of yours. It is also timely, as you know, unfortunately we are witnessing the increasing violence in this so-called frozen conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Both sides have their stories to tell and project themselves as victims of the other. This time round, it has been further complicated due to proddings and support by some external powers due to their own geopolitical and geoeconomic interests. Despite the calls and agreement for ceasefire twice, it has been more observed in violations than observed. Benefactors of the two sides leave no stone unturned to malign the other. One wonders if the Minsk group is still the most relevant to negotiate an acceptable outcome, as more than 2 decades later, not even basic and core principles have not been agreed to, but the goalposts keep on changing. We are going to learn more about this from our panelists, but friends, allow me to do the most pleasant duty today to request Ambassador Achal Malhotra and the panelists to help jointly release the book to your own screen. Please see. Just please bring it up. Achal Malhotra.
Can you see it?
Yes. The book is so aptly titled The South Caucasus From Subjugation to Independence, which I believe Ambassador Achal Malhotra will tell us exactly how he thought of this topic. He has tremendous experience of the region and how he arrived at this. One thing I want to tell you before I hand over and request my friend Achal to come in, that I have read quite a few books, but in this book, everything is so properly documented, generalized, and supported by arguments throughout the picture. And of course, I will have my own questions later on once he has spoken. And so I now would like to request Ambassador Malhotra to please talk about his enterprise.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat, for your opening remarks and a very generous words of encouragement. At the outset, I would also like to thank the Indian Council of World Affairs, first for giving me the opportunity to write this book, and now for organizing its online launch, and also equally importantly, arranging for this panel discussion. And I sincerely look forward to getting benefit from the views and comments of the eminent panelists who have gathered today. Well, when I conceived the idea of writing this book, I was in two minds. Where should I start from? Should I start from the year 1992, when the South Caucasus emerged as an independent region after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Or should I go back into the history? And if I were to go back into the history, how far should I go back? After some consideration, due deliberation with my own self, I thought, in order that my prospective readers get a better and a comprehensive idea and a vision about the region, I must, talk about the evolution, the historical evolution of the region, at least during the past 1.5 century. So as a result, first chapter of my book is a sort of curtain raiser. Here I introduce the region to my readers, not only its geographical description, religious composition, and various basic facts about the region. More importantly, I have focused on the multiple transitions which this region has undergone from the decades of subjugation under three competing powers of those days, namely Ottoman Empire, Persian Empire, and the Russian Empire, up to its incorporation into the USSR, when I think began the period of its subjugation to subservience within the Soviet system. So this continued for next 70 years, and the region emerged out of it as an independent entity after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In this process, I have also tried to figure out what were the factors which motivated the resurgence of suppressed nationalism in this region, leading ultimately to its demand for independence, and also the personality transformation of the people of this region, particularly during the Soviet period, when there was so much of political, economic, social, and even religious transformation that the individuals had to undergo. In fact, even their surnames were changed. But having said that, obviously my main focus was on the modern South Caucasus, and I have devoted considerable space to this aspect. I have dwelt upon at some length on the political evolution of the region since 1992, and to discover for myself and for everybody else that in these 35 plus years, each country of the region, of the three countries in the region, namely Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, have adopted a political trajectory and a foreign policy orientation which is different from each other. Georgia is, obsessed with the idea of integration with the Euro-Atlantic structures. Armenia has one foot in the Russian camp and one foot in the European Union, whereas Azerbaijan has managed to stay away from both the blocs and on its own terms and conditions. So this was one of the focus areas of my book, and here I have dwelt upon the defining moments in the history and how it has evolved over the last 25 plus years. My next focus was on the global and regional players. I mentioned about the the competitive competition between the Russian, Ottoman, and Persian empires during the medieval period of our history. But as soon as the region became independent, from the day one, big players like America, European Union, and Russia have engaged the region. And each one of them has its own vested interests, which are political, which are ideological, which are economic, which are also security and strategic. Well, West has began with the political, mainly with the ideological reasons, because their mission was to ensure that the demise of communism in this region becomes irreversible. And also they wanted the entire region to get integrated with the Western values, their standards of democracy, their standards of rule of law, and also get integrated into the concepts of market economy. In my assessment, Russia had, very few ideological reasons. It had mainly security reasons in mind, and to a certain extent also economic reasons, because Russia considered and considers this region in its backyard as part of the post-Soviet space, and is averse to any idea of any influence by any third force, be that West, be that Turkey, or be that Iran. So here, what has been at the, how these powers have tried to dig in their feet, and what have been their motives, and what are the modus operandi they have adopted, and to what extent have they succeeded. This is the focus of one of the chapters of my book, and my ultimate assessment is that neither of the global players, less the regional players, can claim to have a full control of the region, which remains divided between influences of different forces. Now, as Anil, you have also pointed out, and also it is a topic of the panel discussion. So there are at least two ethno-territorial conflicts which pose in this region, which pose a very serious threat to the stability, peace and stability, not only of this region, but it can have implications which can go much beyond this region. First conflict, of course, is between Georgia and its breakaway, territories, namely Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and Russia. In fact, Russia and Georgia went for a war in August 2008 over Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And of course, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is very much in the news these days. And I think, in fact, this is one of the reasons which probably has generated and revived interest in the region also. Just by the way, in my book, I had mentioned somewhere that Azerbaijan, on the strength of its petrodollar, is acquiring a lot of modern equipment, weapons, and probably is looking for an opportunity when it will be trying to retrieve its lost territories by use of force. I wish my prediction had gone wrong, because this is precisely what has happened. And it looks like that Azerbaijan is not likely to stop unless it has retrieved some face-saving territories which it lost to Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia in 1994. But more importantly, what I have tried to do is I have, looked at various primary sources, the UN resolutions, the OSCE statements, and tried to build a chronology of the efforts which have been made during the last 25 plus years to resolve this conflict. Unfortunately, big players like, USA, France, Russia, OSCE, UN, despite their extensive engagement of the region and the countries and the parties to the conflict, it has not been possible to resolve these conflicts, which is very, very unfortunate. And in my assessment, which I have offered in the book, is that it is not just ethno-territorial conflict. It's a conflict between two principles, the principle of territorial integrity on the one hand, and the principle of right to self-determination on the other hand. And also another reason that these, the interlocutors are finding it difficult to resolve these conflicts is that all the parties to the conflict have taken maximalist positions. South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, they don't want to settle down for anything less than full and complete independence, whereas Georgia and Azerbaijan are at best willing to grant them some autonomy, provided they agree to stay within the territorial limits of these two countries respectively. So unfortunate, and the manner in which the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh has played up, and even Russia is finding it difficult to control it, gives me very little hope that we will be able to resolve it. But if we can bring the conflicting parties to negotiating table in the next few days, that probably would be an achievement by itself. Okay, and now this brings me to the last but a very important aspect, that is India's footprints in the region. I have devoted 2 full chapters in my book trying to trace India's links with this region in the ancient and medieval times and, of course, in the modern times. And in the process, I have narrated some very interesting episodes. For example, the establishment and existence of Hindu settlements in Armenia from 149 BC to 400 early 4th century AD, and a peaceful coexistence between the Hindus and the pagans of the pagan Armenians of those days for almost 450 years, and also about the Hindu and Sikh settlements in Azerbaijan, particularly near Baku. There is a fire temple, and there is an evidence we used to have Hindu settlements there. And also the palpable presence of the Armenian traders in India during the medieval part, when they had excellent relations with the Mughals and later with the East India Company and the British, this thing. I've tried to reason out why the Armenians decided to quit and leave India as we approached towards gaining our independence in 1947. But my main emphasis is on the modern, the India's links and India's policy towards the region in the modern times from 1992 onwards. Well, India was very quick in establishing its diplomatic relations with all 3 countries in the region, and also establishing its embassies in at least in Armenia and Azerbaijan. We don't have it in Georgia at the moment. But I think thereafter our focus was on Russia and maybe on Central Asia. And somehow this region as a whole has not been on the foreign policy radar of India to the extent probably we would have liked to see it. So as a result of this, and probably for some extraneous reasons, and I have tried to reason out, identify what are the extraneous reasons for which today we are in a situation when our relations with 3 countries in the region is completely uneven. We probably have the best of relations with Armenia, from where we have received 3 heads of state, and whereas none from Azerbaijan or Georgia, and we have not even established our diplomatic mission in Tbilisi, despite they having set up their embassy here and repeatedly asking us to do that. I think the extraneous reasons are Russia and Georgia's poor relations and Azerbaijan's determination to sort of not only support but also promote Pakistan's narrative on Kashmir. But then there are many other reasons which should give us, a reason to engage this region. I mean, we are aspiring to be a global player, and we need the help and support of each of the countries, irrespective of the size. Azerbaijan and Armenia, they can provide a very good access to us, to Europe and Russia, through transport routes like international South corridor, North-South corridor. Azerbaijan has some oil and gas resources. We already have invested. But on the whole, I think the region still remains on the periphery of our, foreign policy priorities. And so much so that while we have a well-defined policies like neighborhood first policy, Act East policy, Connect Central Asia policy, but we don't have any publicly articulated, policy for South Caucasus. And maybe this is not needed because, as I mentioned, that all these countries have adopted their own different political trajectories. They have their own foreign policy priorities, and perhaps India is best advised to deal with them on one-to-one basis. And so that's broadly, I would conclude by saying the overarching objective of writing this book was to cover it in a very comprehensive manner. Idea was to have give a narration as well as analysis in a manner that it could evoke the interest not only of the experts and the scholars, but also generate some interest in the students of this region, or some people to get interested in this region if they get to read this book. And if this objective is achieved, then I would feel very, very happy that the whole, my effort to write this book has been very fruitful. So with these words, I thank you, all of you, for your patient, and I look forward to the panel discussion. And of course, I'll be very glad to answer any questions which are addressed to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Malhotra. That was excellent and gives you a preview into your book and the arguments that you have carried forward in a very beautifully woven architecture in this book. And I think it makes a compulsive reading for anyone who is interested to learn about the South Caucasus and to unwind whatever is happening there. And now, of course, we have to, I'll have a couple of questions for you, which I'll pose one or two of mine just for clarification and reiteration. You have already touched upon those. But now that we have to carry on with the panel discussion on the Nagorno-Karabakh imbroglio, of course, this is something that is capturing the global attention, and of course has resulted in a large number of people being dead on both sides. Both sides have been accusing one another, as has been the case all through. Unfortunately, for the last 2 decades or so, until July this year, or in 2016, that 4 days war, broadly it has been quite a quiet region to begin with. They have had problems. They have been meeting under the Minsk, and bilaterally foreign ministers have been meeting several conferences, and they have agreed on different points, but at the same time it seems that every time the issues kept on expanding. Like now the Prime Minister of Armenia wants the leader of the Nagorno-Karabakh to be included in the negotiation. So both sides, Azerbaijan has its own accusation, and so is Armenia accusing. But we are seeing that a lot of civilian casualties are occurring in the process, which is not a very a good thing. And I believe that only yesterday President Putin has conveyed some kind of warning, and so the Americans and everyone has done it. But we need to understand exactly whether, of course, this Minsk group is there, but then Turkey is not exactly the part of it, but Turkey is playing a very significant role in this whole fracas which is happening, and not only now, since 1993 onwards, actually, but much more so during this time. So I find that this time it is becoming very difficult. And this is also a gift of history. As we have seen these problems, whether it was in India or on Palestine or elsewhere in the world, whether it was the British dying British Empire's legacy, or the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Frankly, these issues like the South Caucasus today and these problems have been there. Like you have mentioned in your book, that Soviet Union's decision of 28th November 1989 to give up its direct rule over Nagorno-Karabakh and to restore it to Azerbaijan outraged Armenians, who in defiance of Moscow responded by declaring on 1st December 1989 Nagorno-Karabakh as part of an unified Armenian Republic. Now, since then, of course, we have seen what is the history. There have been problems, and as you have also mentioned, that both the countries have become extremely, I think, overarmed because Azerbaijan is an oil-rich country, gas-rich country, and is very well connected through its pipelines to Europe by Turkey, and it is an important player in the region. But at the same time, when we see that the Armenians have a Russian base, they are part of the CSTO, and apparently Russia is pretty bound to defend it as well. But it wants to retain its influence by trying to bring the two sides together. But when the goalposts are so different, as you have mentioned, whether it is territorial or whether it is right to self-determination, now how easily they can be brought about and discussed, these issues, because it seems to be more of the same. Now, every time, whatever I have read through your book about the various, whether it's UN resolutions or the Madrid or the other core points or whatever they have agreed on, are certain issues they are just leaving on the periphery. They are not even touching those because they are hot issues, especially like once the ceasefire has been achieved, then what happens there? So that is something that is about Nagorno-Karabakh, whether it becomes within the greater autonomy within Azerbaijan, or the corridor that has been provided to Armenia, to Nagorno-Karabakh for looking after the Armenians. And so I find that it is indeed very difficult, and that is why, as you mentioned, that perhaps this time after the July unrest that happened, that probably Azerbaijan thought that it is time that they try to get the territory which belongs to them, which has been recognized internationally that it is an Azerbaijan territory. So I believe that this is going to be a very interesting situation, how the world is going to bring about together, because it is a war that needs to be stopped. Secondly, I find that the role of external, and you have written about the role of Turkey, Iran, and others, but we are seeing strange bedfellows who don't even have diplomatic relations with one or the other. For example, Turkey supports, of course, Azerbaijan, like the two nation, one state kind of thing. And the Russians are the largest suppliers of arms ammunition to Azerbaijan. Israel is the second largest supplier of arms ammunition, and this is one of the few Muslim countries they have excellent relations. Pakistan has been supporting Azerbaijan forever, and there have been reports that the Pakistani terrorist groups or the special forces have been supporting or maybe working there in concert, although all these have been denied. Likewise, there have been accusations that Turkey brought in about 1,300 mercenaries from Syria. I mean, why do they get people mercenaries? For the simple reason there is this simple sense of deniability. You can always say that we are not directly participating. Of course, given the kind of relations Turkey and Azerbaijan have, only yesterday President Erdogan again reiterated that he will be willing to come and assist if Baku asks for support. Now that brings Russia and Turkey again in direct confrontation. And that is precisely what President Putin has been trying to avoid, because they have too many fronts, whether it is in Libya, whether it is in this Nagorno-Karabakh or in Syria. So there are these major problems that could not be that easy, and that will bring in the other dimension if really blows up far, and you rightly mentioned that might blow over. And then if the pipelines that have been very close to the Armenian border also, I mean, if they get hurt in the process, or there are destructions take place there and the supplies to Europe and to, of course, Azerbaijan and to Turkey and Israel are stopped, we might have different problems. On the other hand, we are seeing Iran, which should have logically and naturally, because both these have been part of the Persian Empire, should have supported Azerbaijan. They are having an equanimous view between the two. They are trying to bring about some kind of a semblance of dialogue between the two sides, urging them. And Rouhani has spoken to both the leaders and, of course, to the Russians to somehow bring, so that they directly they don't come into the picture. So what I'm trying to see here is, and it is quite an interesting development, that how these powers are looking after their geopolitical and geoeconomic interests, despite the problems in the region that are continuing to happen. Now, Turkey, of course, wants to be part of the negotiations. It says that whether we want us in the battlefield or on the negotiating table, we are going to be there. So we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. As far as India is concerned, you rightly mentioned that India has probably done well by sitting on the fence or hedging its bets with both the countries, even though logically Armenia has supported India on the Jammu and Kashmir, whereas Azerbaijan has gone along with the Pakistani narrative, not once, twice, but for a very long time. And I think naturally, but at the same time, if you see that while we have a trade of about just $50 million with the $60 million with Armenia, with Azerbaijan, it is more than $1 billion. And besides, our economic relations have grown much farther. We are also international north-south transport corridor is becoming. Azerbaijan is becoming an important partner. So that's why India has to see its long-term interests in the region. And when everything works out historically, yes, of course, we have had close relations courtesy Persian Empire, or I visited the Athar Zafar temple only last March. And frankly, the way, I must say, I've not been to Armenia, but I've been an ambassador there, a beautiful country, and a lot of Indians Hindus had their own, they stayed in the 1st to 4th centuries there. And when I was posted in Russia, I was involved with this Armenian church and their money that was left in Kolkata and to bring it out. So I feel that India perhaps could take a little more, but I would say that you have in your book written that India had no policy on the Caucasus. This is the headline. So that's an interesting headline, but I believe that sometimes people say that having no policy is also a policy. So let us see how it plays out eventually. Now, I wouldn't talk much because we have two other very great experts with us today. Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey from the Jawaharalal. Incidentally, all four of us panelists are from Jawaharalal University. Who's been the chairperson for the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at the School of International Studies in JNU. And he has been L.M. Singhvi Visiting Fellow at the Center of South Asian Studies, University of Cambridge, Clare Wallace Trust Visiting Fellow, University of Cambridge, and he has been an observer in the parliamentary elections in Uzbekistan. Now, since he has his expertise in also Russian, I would also, while he is talking about the conflict, I would also request him to talk about Russia's role as to how pertinent, how important, how effective it is in today's scenario. Professor Pandey, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat. Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan and Dr. Athar Zafar for inviting me. And thank you, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, for writing this book. I'm saying so because this is a very timely work. I'm not saying so just because recently the Nagorno-Karabakh conflicts flared up and we find it everywhere in the newspapers and the television, but also because you have tried to introduce Indian students of IR, and those who are interested in foreign policy matters to this very important region. Although, as many of my previous speakers have said, this region has not really been given much attention either by our, perhaps not even by government, but also not by the academia and the press. So the fact that you have given this book to all those who are interested in Eurasian politics, interested in international politics, for them it is a boon. I say that this region is important because of primarily two reasons. One is that connectivity and energy security, these two terms have gained a lot of currency in the last 2 or 3 decades. And in both these respects, South Caucasus is very important. When it comes to connectivity, we know that it is the meeting point of Asia and Europe. The traditional as well as modern communication lines between Asia and Europe mainly traverse through this region. Whether it is China's OBOR, Belt and Road, or India's INSTC, East-West Corridor linkages, for both India and China and the greater Eurasian region, Caucasus, South Caucasus is very important. Another reason why it is important is because of its significant oil and gas reserves, mainly Azerbaijan, and because of some of the pipelines, oil and gas pipelines. BTC is just one of them, which help in supplying Caucasian oil, Caspian oil to the larger, wider markets of Europe. So for energy security also, the region is important. For connectivity, it is very important. The good thing about Ambassador Achal Malhotra's book is that apart from introducing the region in a very lucid and simple way, he also deals with the complexities in the region without confusing the reader. I mean, and he very rightly highlights the fact that although the three countries of the region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, have intertwined history and inhabit a very sharply defined geographical space, despite that, the three have not seen eye to eye, especially in the last nearly 30 years of their independent existence. And the three have followed sometimes overlapping, but at the same time very distinct trajectories, both in terms of their domestic political development, their economic development, and especially in their foreign policy. So this aspect of their distinct foreign policy has been very lucidly brought out by Ambassador Achal Malhotra. He very rightly says that among the three countries, Georgia is the one, while all of them, not just them, all the 15 post-Soviet states have largely in the last 30 years, and especially in the first decade of their existence, all of them were looking towards Europe and US and were following pro-US, pro-West policy, were trying to transition from communist economy to market economy, trying to transform their one-party polities into competitive multi-party, some form of liberal democracy. At least that was the initial objective and agenda of almost all the countries coming out of Soviet Union, and the three countries of South Caucasus are no exceptions, were no exceptions. But apart from that, beyond that, coming to the nuances, which Ambassador Malhotra points out very, very clearly and very, very lucidly, the fact that Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia have followed very different trajectories in their foreign policy. Georgia has been the most enthusiastic in integrating itself into Western political economy and security structures, that is NATO and EU. while Armenia and Azerbaijan had a more complex policy towards EU and US, both of them wanted good relations with them. Azerbaijan especially, Ambassador Malhotra points out, has followed a policy of trying to engage with Europe, mainly in the economic arena, to promote trade, investment, technology transfer. But beyond that, Azerbaijan, because of very clear domestic reasons, which again the book clearly brings out, the fact that Azerbaijan can be called the least democratic among all the three countries and has institutionalized a form of personalized and family rule. So naturally, they would not be very comfortable with EU standards on democracy and human rights. And the EU has been critical, despite EU's significant interest in Azerbaijan's energy and recipient of Azerbaijan's oil and gas through BTC pipeline. And therefore, it wants to remain engaged, Europe in general, EU, with Azerbaijan. But at the same time, because of what they see as Azerbaijan's poor record in democracy and human rights, they don't want any further cooperation unless Azerbaijan is willing to make amends and change its domestic politics in line with EU standards. So therefore, very rightly, Azerbaijan is least interested. Armenia, on the other hand, again, Ambassador Malhotra very, very clearly and with lot of facts and details brings out Armenia's over-dependence on Russia, but at the same time, its desire to maintain relations with Europe also. So all these have been brought out very well by the book. And it was a pleasure reading it. Now, coming to the present conflict and related to some observations about what I think the book could have dealt with, and especially in the light of present conflict. Now, some of the antecedents, the facts about the present conflict, of course, Ambassador Malhotra brings out very clearly, but especially something to do with Soviet nationality policy, and which created in the first place this problem. Perhaps one could have expected some more information, of course. In a book of 200 plus pages, 221 pages of description, and then another 30-40 pages of references and notes, one cannot expect. But I would like to, in 2-3 minutes, deal with that aspect which I believe has not been dealt with adequately. Now that brings me to Soviet nationality policy, which was very complex and at the same time very contradictory. It was contradictory in the sense that on the one hand, the Marxist ideology and Soviet theoreticians, Marxism especially, does not in fact believe in nationalism, which they consider as part of superstructure, economic base being the main determinant. They believe it is part of false consciousness, bourgeois consciousness. The bourgeois democracies or bourgeois leaders, capitalists basically create national divisions for their own purpose. So basically it is opposed to nationalism. On the other hand, the way that Soviet leadership, including Lenin, have tried to accommodate nationalism and initially even talked about national self-determination. That's very interesting. The American President Woodrow Wilson and Russian leader Lenin, both talking about national self-determination, and in following that principle, they even allowed Finland to gain independence, also Poland. But when it came to many other 100 plus nationalities residing in the Tsarist Russia, which Lenin very aptly described as prison house of nationalities, and he promised them national self-determination. He entrusted his closest colleague Stalin to deal with. He made him the commissar, the minister for nationalities, and Stalin wrote a book on national question in which he basically deals with what is nation, other things, and then talks about national self-determination. But the challenge before the Bolsheviks was how to accommodate it without in any way weakening or territorially weakening or limiting the Soviet Union, the upcoming Bolshevik or socialist state. So Poland, Finland maybe, but what about the other nationalities? So they basically said that the other nationalities, only the party of the proletariat, that is the Communist Party, the proletariat will be given right of self-determination, and among the proletariat, the party of the proletariat, the Communist Party, the vanguard party will only exercise. So what they gave by one hand, basically they took by the other, because the Communist parties in all these regions, in whatever small or insignificant number they were all aligned to Moscow Communist Party, to the Russian Communist Party, and they would not go against their interests. So that was it. But in another way, the Soviets accommodated nationalist aspirations by creating union republics or national republics and autonomous republics named after titular nationalities, and giving these titular nationalities certain cultural rights, and at least creating a region or a republic named after them, and then giving them, as I said, some linguistic and cultural rights. But it went beyond that, although it is often, the critics of Soviet system often say that all these things were on paper. But nevertheless, the fact that on Soviet constitution, your nationality was mentioned, your Ukrainian or Azerbaijani or Armenian nationality was mentioned, in many ways reinforced the national feelings. And although the Soviets claimed that they were aiming to create a Soviet man rising above national aspirations and national divisions, but by the later half of 1980s, when Gorbachev launched his perestroika and glasnost programs, it became very evident that the national sentiments and hostilities and ambitions have not really been taken care of. Soviet Union, maybe they had put everything under carpet, but once glasnost, openness gave the various groups and peoples a right to express their opinion, it came out very openly, and 1988 marks, in fact, Nagorno-Karabakh was the first major ethnic or nationality-based conflict in Soviet Union. And then, of course, we all know how the Union disintegrated, and to a large extent on the national question, the Union Treaty, which was being negotiated, which would have given these constituent units of Soviet Union greater autonomy, ultimately failed despite being approved in a national referendum in March 1991. But then there was August coup, which preempted the Union Treaty from coming into force. And then the very act of August coup, which wanted to preserve, ostensibly, they claimed to preserve the Union, in fact, led to its disintegration. What followed after that has been very, very well documented by Ambassador Achal Malhotra. The conflict between 92 and 94, in which 30,000 people were killed and more than 1 million were displaced. More than 700,000, 7 lakh Azerbaijanis were displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh and adjoining regions, and more than 200,000 Armenians, 250,000 Armenians, 2.5 lakh Armenians were forced to leave Azerbaijan. And since then, it has been often described as a frozen conflict, although Ambassador Achal Malhotra very rightly points out that they have not been really frozen conflicts. These have been simmering conflicts, which have erupted from time to time, every now and then, every few years. The last time there was an eruption was in the 4-day war of 2016, which Russia was somehow able to manage. I will just take 1 or 2 minutes to highlight Russia's role, and Ambassador Trigunayat wanted me to highlight it. Well, again, Ambassador Malhotra very clearly brings out Russia's predominant strategic interest, security concerns in what it considers to be its near abroad. It does not have any ideological ambitions. Ambassador Malhotra says there can be slight difference of opinion on this. Maybe in Q&A I will be able to say something on this. Russia, again, the book very clearly points out how Russia has been the main supporter and backer of Armenia, but at the same time has very fruitful cooperation with Azerbaijan. It has provided a lot of arms and armaments to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan being importing the largest number, if you take 25 years, the largest number of arms and ammunition Azerbaijan has imported from Russia. Russia would also not like Azerbaijan to go totally into the Western orbit or to Turkey. Again, Ambassador Trigunayat very rightly mentioned the term one nation, two states. This is how the Azerbaijanis and the Turks see each other. Well, the old power play between Turkey, earlier the Ottomans, and the Russians have again re-emerged. It's very interesting how history repeats itself, although in a new, in new way, in changed circumstances and geopolitics. But throughout 18th and 19th century, Russia and Ottoman Turkey was at loggerheads. Russia was trying to expand at the cost of Ottoman Turks, who were being supported by France, Britain, and other great powers of Europe. So again, we see something similar, not entirely, but here is Turkey, which again is the main supporter of Azerbaijan. Turkey, which is a NATO member, but which has not been allowed to take membership of EU. So the complexity in the relations between Turkey and Europe is there for everyone to see. Well, often the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict has been portrayed in religious terms, which is not very correct. Huntington's clash of civilization is not really applicable, although there is some history of animosity between the Armenians and the Turks, and Azeris being Turks, larger Turkic family, especially the issue of Armenian genocide. But even before that, there were violence between the two groups, but it was not always or not necessarily for religious reasons. And then if you see the role of Iran, the Islamic Republic, the only country having witnessed a genuinely popular Islamic revolution, Azerbaijan and Iran, they are not just neighbors. Nearly 25% of Iran's population is of Azeri origin. So ideally, we should have expected, and going by Huntington's clash of civilizations, Iran should have sided with Azerbaijan, which it has not done. In fact, it has tacitly supported Armenia, but it's not just geopolitics. If you go to Iran, you will find that Armenian diaspora in Iran, Armenian churches in Iran, they are in very good condition. They are allowed to practice their religion. So Iran's roles, all these nuances about Iran, about Russia's role, Turkey's instance has not been very nuanced. It is rather very clear. That doesn't leave me with any time to discuss India's ties with the region. I am afraid my time has come to an end. I'm sure my subsequent speakers have more than to say on this, and maybe in Q&A. Thank you very much once again. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Thank you. It was really very interesting, and you really encapsulated the book in a very wisely and in a very short time. At the same time, of course, what you said about the Soviet man, across nationalities, and of course, I mean, even till today we have the Tatars. Of course, they are in the republics within the within Russia, even now. So, but this situation is developing, and now we have Dr. Anita Sengupta, who is an area studies specialist And her areas of interest include issues of identity, politics, migration, gender, borders, critical geopolitics, and logistics from an Asian perspective. She is currently the Director Asia in Global Affairs, Kolkata, and Senior Fellow, Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi. Dr. Sengupta is the author of Myth and Rhetoric of the Turkish Model, Exploring Developmental Alternatives and Heartlands of Eurasia, the Geopolitics of Political Space, and several other books to her credit. Dr. Sengupta, we request your comments on the book, number one. And number two, as Professor Pandey has also spoken about Turkey, and since you have studied Turkey in greater detail, I'll request you, and if you would like to talk about India's relations with the Armenia and Azerbaijan, especially if it could play any role in the ensuing conflict. Grateful if you can comment on that.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking ICWA for this. As it has been pointed out, this is really a very timely volume that explains the complexity of both the general public as well as those who are interested. And I think the fact that it is written in such a language that it will be accessible to the general public makes it a really important contribution. My own interest in the South Caucasus has been as of the region as part of the larger Eurasian study that I have been involved in for the last few years, and it has actually been focused on Armenia for a number of both professional as well as personal ones. I have been actually studying Turkey and Turkish politics for some years, and as part of the process of reconciliation Turkey times, there has been focus on the Armenian genocide. So Armenia come into however, as the volume also notes, Kolkata is has had a very long connect with Armenians and Armenia. There is a very beautiful functioning Armenian church in Kolkata. We have a number of houses of Armenian traders which still plaques of the names of the traders written on them. In fact, like I said, there are a number of personal reasons. My daughter's is from Armenia, and the current conflict, even before I heard media reports of the current conflict was brought to my notice by my daughter as an Armenian student in her class who joins in on her online, who wrote to her saying that her father and brother had been recruited for the war effort. So there are actually many aspects to the problem as it exists, geopolitical, geoeconomic, and of course the human cost of conflict. What I thought I would do today is, of course, talk about the volume, but in terms of countries that enclaves like Nagorno-Karabakh actually present globally. In fact, till recently, the largest number of enclaves in our neighborhood was on the Indo-Bangladesh border, and the so-called Chitmohs, as they were known. In fact, there were cases of double enclavity with Indian enclave Bangladesh surrounded by Indian territory. Now, while on paper the territorial issues resolved to a very large extent after the post-2015, but on the ground, issues remain. And that is the case with the question of resolution of enclaves in parts of the world. However, there are very interesting, like Tok, which is an Uzbek enclave within Kyrgyzstan populated by Tajiks, bringing with it the larger question of whether there can in fact be a perfect solution to territorial entity that have overlapping and multiple interpretations of belonging rights. And I thought this is what I would focus on in terms of our discussion on Naga. Now, an enclave is understood as part of a territory of one state enclosed within the territory. This contradicts the idea of a contiguous nation, that states would actually be happy to exchange them or just give them up. But that is not the case in most cities. Every case of enclavity is in fact very unique and different. And Nagorno-Karabakh is no exception. While, as the volume says, it had been by separatist Armenians before, in the post-disintegration period, the oblast was returned to Azeri control and internationally recognized part of Azerbaijan. However, on the 1st of December 1989, Armenian Supreme Court the decision, the Karabakh right to self-determination, and in fact proclaimed reunification of Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia. And as the volume very correctly notes, it is this contradiction between the right to self-determination and the principle of territorial integrity that refuses to resolve itself and which kind of brings up the conflict again and again in recent times. In fact, enclaves influence relations between their mainlands and surrounding states in a disproportionate degree, smallness of both their territory and their population. In fact, it is argued that the Karabakhs can control Armenia far more than vice versa. In fact, this is also something that the volume actually, except for the current Armenian Prime Minister, most Armenian leaders have actually had their roots in fact, the importance of enclaves in international far beyond their relative weight in terms of both population and this importance is not restricted to the people who live in them. They influence other political and economic issues between their respective and the surrounding states. And it is here that the fact of enclavity actually raises certain issues that I think are important and need to be taken into account when one is talking about how to actually look at the whole issue and how to bring about some kind of resolution. I think some of the issues that are important is there are other specific political economic patterns which are conditioned by notions of enclavity. How do they emerge? Are they generally incapable of being sustainable on their own? How do national, religious, linguistic composition patterns contribute to the quality of relations with the surrounding state and the mainland? Does enclave existence lead to notions of identity? Are enclaves perpetually objects of tension? And if something can be done to secure peace, what is it that can bring about a resolution? What is the place of enclaves in bilateral relations between the surrounding and the mainland state? And what is the place of enclaves in world politics? What is their place in the world economy? Now, these are some of the questions that I think are important that one needs to really talk about in the present situation, because it is basically this problem of enclavity that has given rise to the whole conflict. Now, the answers to these questions will vary in different parts of the world. However, to come back to the region that we are discussing today, that is Nagorno-Karabakh and the present conflict, it is a fact that ceasefires have not held, over the last week or 10 days, ceasefires have been negotiated by the Russians. They've been negotiated by the French, assisted by the Russians at their place. And this has happened again and again for a number of very in notions and differences that are intrinsic to the fact of enclavity, in a sense. However, a solution would depend on the evolution of the position of the three actors, as the volume says, but unfortunately, the position of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Karabakh Armenians have not changed in essence over the years at all. Azerbaijan insists on restoration of territorial integrity, and the Karabakh Armenians, backed by Armenia, view that the solution is independence and international recognition of the republic, including the Latin corridor. Now, this is also very interesting because we've had a resolution of what is known as the Teen Bikha corridor of the Indo-Bangladesh border, and how for a very long time Teen Bikha used to open to both sides during the daytime and then closed at night. So in a certain portion, people could actually walk in and negotiate their space. And these are various kinds of solutions that in different parts of the world that could actually become important for the conflict as it emerges today. Now, what is the solution? Once again, is it a territorial swap? In fact, there have been a lot of writing in recent times as to how does one, because a conflict in an area that is so geopolitical and actually has raised a number of solutions. And is it a territorial swap? But what kind of territorial swap? That also becomes a problem. Or with various levels of what the Azerbaijani government terms as broad autonomy be the solution. There have also been discussions about a new confederation with Azerbaijan, with Nagorno-Karabakh. In other words, the question is whether Nagorno-Karabakh's relationship with Azerbaijan would be horizontal or vertical. Now, obviously, Azerbaijanis would want it to be a vertical relationship, whereas the Armenians and the Karabakhis themselves want a more horizontal relationship. Now, there are, of course, various models that the Cyprus model, for example, models of neutrality that could be important in order to understand what level of autonomy Nagorno-Karabakh could enjoy. But the Azerbaijani position, as I said, was that they could enjoy self-rule and what they call broad autonomy, but no role in foreign affairs defense-based taxation. There is also the issue of the Nagorno-Karabakh army, and the Azerbaijani foreign minister that in any form of solution in the framework of the Azerbaijani state, what would be the need of a separate army? Again, who would it be directed to? Obviously, against the Azerbaijanis. Can you have within a state separate army? So these, like I said, these are questions of enclave, questions that enclave actually raises that have really no solutions as such. And it is here that one is brought back to the larger question of whether there can be a negotiated solution to an ethno-political conflict that has its roots in imperial boundary making, and if so, would it be driven by the states themselves, by regional powers who would be assisting this, or by global powers and international organizations? Now, there has already been discussion on various aspects of this. Sanjay was talking about Turkey, Turkey's role, of Russia. There have been very interesting writings in recent times which talk about a misinformation war that is going on, about the kinds of people who are coming in from outside to be a part of the negotiated conflict, and all of these once again these various issues. But I think it is important to conflict zones attract militants from various kinds of military organizations, and this is being reported with the news of Syrian militants being involved in the Azerbaijani side, and of course, as Service asked me to talk about the Turkish involvement in Azerbaijan. This is, there is obviously a focus on the fact that they are being helped by the Turkish side, but the extent of the help, whether actually militants, because there were reports from the Russian side about with names of various organizations. Some of these organizations are no longer defunct, but of course you need to remember that these are organizations that keep changing their names also, so it's very difficult to identify them. The obvious Turkish hand in this has meant that there is opposition to what is being as an attempt by Turkey to broaden its influence in the region. That, of course, is a fact. And I think I'll end here. I'm really not going to talk about the Indian position. I have a feeling that Athar will be, after me, will be focusing on it. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be part of the webinar. And thank you for this opportunity of reading what was a very interesting, very lucid reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sengupta. It was, although you're, I think you were not so well audible throughout, but you made really very important points, and hope always remains that somehow the peace will prevail and we'll come to some kind of a solution despite pole opposite positions that they have taken both sides. So one doesn't know exactly how it will work out. Now I'll request Dr. Athar Zafar, who is also the host today and the research fellow on the ICW. I believe we are going to talk about the bilateral relations.
Yes, sir. Bilateral. Also, I will talk about the region and reactions of Central Asian countries, and briefly about Iran, Azerbaijan.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. First, let me also congratulate Mr. Achal Malhotra for an interesting and useful book that he has written. And the book has come at an opportune time when more and more students, scholars, area watchers, and people in India are and around the world are interested to know about South Caucasus, the conflicts, its causes, and the wider region. So my intervention is divided into three parts. First, some observation about the book. Secondly, little discussion about the ongoing fight between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh in the South Caucasus and reactions of some of its neighbors and Central Asian countries, and finally about India's connection with the region. So when we talk about the book, suddenly there is increased interest and attention towards South Caucasus, and consisting of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. The fight has once again broken out between Azerbaijani and Nagorno-Karabakh side, but not much literature is available in India, as highlighted earlier, about the contemporary times of the region. There are hardly single-author books on South Caucasus region as a whole, or individual countries of the region giving an Indian perspective. Ambassador Achal Malhotra and the Council must be congratulated for undertaking and commencing a kind of pioneering work on South Caucasus. There is lack of academic resources and information in India about the region, which has witnessed numerous problems and conflicts in the last couple of decades. It must have been a difficult task for the author to gather all the valuable information he has put in the book. For a long time, academia in India took little notice of South Caucasus, probably due to its distance or its location in the region surrounded by relatively big countries like Russia, Turkey, and Iran. The initiative has been made by Ambassador Malhotra, and hopefully more diplomats and scholars will start taking academic interest in the region, which is significant for India in many ways, and the book lists them from political, economy to culture. The interesting thing is that the book uses documents, tables, and maps to clearly chart out the issue, whether it is about political issues, demography, ethnic distribution of population, linguistic mapping, statements and treaties, and also about India's trade with the region. The maps are very helpful in understanding the complexities and geographic location of the hotspot in South Caucasus, that is Nagorno-Karabakh and its surrounding territories between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and between Georgia and South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The book is an easy read with its simple but succinct approach, which avoids jargons and complex terminologies or sentence structure. Building on from historical period, the author is successful in maintaining the interest of reader throughout while grasping the domestic and international political and economic issues of South Caucasus. Certainly, the book progresses systematically and helps in developing holistic understanding of South Caucasus, regional complexities, and the current imbroglio in the region. Before moving to the next session of my intervention, the attention of the author may be drawn to just 2 points, maybe for elaboration. On page 176 at the footnote, where it is mentioned that the decline of Mughal Empire began in 1606 and collapsed in 1857. Probably it's a typo, as it is generally believed that the Mughal Empire began to decline from early 18th century onwards, roughly 100 years later. Secondly, the book clearly mentions about the Persian-Iranian influence in the region from historical to the current period. On relations between India and Azerbaijan, it says on page 164 that there has been, quote, decades of mutual distrust and antagonism, unquote. So it generates curiosity, further curiosity among the readers, and some additional information on this would have been more useful for the readers. In brief, I found the book very useful in terms of analysis of the developments in the region for domestic perspectives from the standpoint of three countries of the region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. The roles of regional players like Turkey and Russia, as well as that of players like European Union and US, have also been explained. The book is strongly recommended for the students, scholars, and those having interest in the South Caucasus. The book also clearly reflects the acumen of a diplomat when dealing with the issues of the region, but also shows the pain of a scholar in him when he mentions that many of the resources remain unexplored about India's historical connections with the region, including the fan-shaped ancient Tamil palm leaf in Armenia. Once again, thank you, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, for the wonderful book you have authored for those interested in the region. I hope that now you would be planning separate books on each country of the region. About the Caucasus, briefly, that in its days of glory, which was during the medieval period, the South Caucasus produced many scholars, traders, merchants, mystics. The Caucasus, or Koh-e-Qaf, which, as mentioned in the medieval literature, is associated with fairy tales, abode of God, or a place of self-realization, as depicted by the 12th century Sufi poet Fariduddin Attar in his Mantiq-ut-Tayr, or Conference of Bird, where Simurgh, or 30 birds, go to the Caucasus in search of God. The region has been associated with ravishing beauty. And even the 19th century writer from India, Abdul Halim Sharar, also writes his widely popular novel, Firdaus-e-Bari, in a setting of Caucasus region. However, with the entry of power games, geopolitics, emergence of nation-state boundaries, world wars, foreign occupation of the region is torn with instability, conflict, wars, and devastation. Since the emergence of independent states in early 90s, the South Caucasus had witnessed conflicts and wars. The current fighting between Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan sides is also a reflection of these interplays. The book mentions how the host of issues have plagued the region for decades, affecting their economic, political, and connectivity potential. The cumulative result has been the appearance of one of the most non-integrated regions, despite sharing long historical, economic, and cultural exchanges. The vast potential of the region remains unexplored due to the maximalist stance adopted by both Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. The book rightly predicts on page 118 about the volatility of the situation in South Caucasus and the possibility of conflict outbreak, which, as mentioned by Ambassador Malhotra, that Azerbaijan, backed by revenues from energy resources, is spending considerable funds on its military build-up, and it is trying to revive, and the conflict has restarted in September 2020. The roots of the conflict may be traced in the policy of divide and rule used by the external powers which were dominating the areas of their control with diverse population. It was a tool to maintain control lest they unite and pose a challenge to their authority. It provided for the arbitrate and interfere in case of dispute, as is happening today. There are many examples of what is called frozen and not frozen cases in different parts of the world. The arbitrary transfer of Armenian populated region of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan has led to the current problem. At first, it was decided that Karabakh would be part of Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, but the decision was reversed and Nagorno-Karabakh became an autonomous region under the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic. It may be mentioned that at that time about 90% of the population of Nagorno-Karabakh were ethnic Armenians. The situation is further complicated with the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh region also includes some areas where Azerbaijani people are in majority. So the nature of dispute. The dispute is not only about Nagorno-Karabakh, whose borders have not been defined by either Nagorno-Karabakh Authority or by Armenia, but also about the territories of Azerbaijan which are under Nagorno-Karabakh forces. The book mentions by the time ceasefire agreement was reached, Armenia not only gained control over the entire Nagorno-Karabakh but also captured 7 Azeri districts surrounding the Karabakh region. The 7 districts constitute more than 7,500 square kilometers of Azerbaijani land and about 20% of its territory. The international community does not recognize the occupation of either Nagorno-Karabakh or the adjacent territories of Azerbaijan. Further, Armenia has not annexed Nagorno-Karabakh nor recognized it as an independent state. Besides, there are conflicting perceptions among the people of Armenia and the people of Azerbaijan over the future of Nagorno-Karabakh, or among the people of Nagorno-Karabakh about its future. According to a survey by the Washington Post in February 2020, the support among the people of Nagorno-Karabakh for unification with Armenia is 33%. And a majority of 55% support independent status for Nagorno-Karabakh. On the other hand, majority in Armenia, about 78%, favor unification of Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia. For the international community, the situation is compounded as one country making claims on historical facts. Armenia's support to Nagorno-Karabakh is rooted in historical, cultural, self-determination and religious connections. Azerbaijan, while insists on the concept of territorial integrity, it is a difficult choice to make for the international community as it may have repercussions in different parts of the world. So the question arises why the conflict has started when there is pandemic situation in the region. There have been various observations by the analysts saying that the timing suits to the domestic and global conditions. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan are facing economic difficulties caused by low hydrocarbon prices, reduction in remittances, COVID-19 pandemic and its fallout. There have been about 1,000 deaths in Armenia and more than 600 in Azerbaijan due to COVID-19. There is discontent in Azerbaijan over the long family rule in the country. There were protests in July before the conflict began in Baku, leading to arrests of some opposition leaders and activists. Similarly, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan had come to power in Armenia with a strong mandate and with high hopes of creating better living conditions. But he also fared below expectations, and there are concerns about the slow pace of reforms. The pandemic has exacerbated the situation. The support to the Nagorno-Karabakh people is a good distraction from troubles. In August 2019, the Prime Minister visited Nagorno-Karabakh and said, Artsakh, which is the Armenian name for Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh is Armenia and that's it. And there were chants of unification. So the conflict helps in deflecting domestic criticism. On the other hand, the world is also distracted in dealing with the pandemic. There is a repeat of wave in European economies. Russia and Iran are under sanctions, and Trump and the US is busy in the election. Now coming to the reactions of some of the Central Asian countries. Kazakhstan has been providing a platform to find solution to Nagorno-Karabakh situation. In July, the book mentions, in July 2010, foreign ministers of the 3 OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs countries, Russia, US and France, met their counterparts from Armenia and Azerbaijan on the margins of OSCE Ministerial in Almaty. Astana, which is now Nur Sultan, had hosted the OSCE summits in December 2010. The Kazakhstan Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement expressing deep concern over the conflict and called to start negotiation. It expressed its willingness to assist in seeking peaceful ways to settle the conflict on the platforms of international organization. As the chair of SICA, Kazakhstan is chair of SICA, So it also suggested to use the existing package of confidence-building measures of SICA. Kyrgyz Republic, since the first week of October, has embroiled in the domestic political upheaval following the results of election, which were not acceptable to many of the many people in the country. However, that the Kyrgyz Republic has called for restraint and settlement of the conflict by peaceful means through negotiations, and it urged the observance of principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Tajikistan also urged the parties to take urgent reaction to end hostilities. In a statement, it said that the solution to conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh is possible only by political and diplomatic methods within the framework of generally recognized. Turkmenistan, which is across the Caspian Sea in Central Asia, pursues a policy of permanent neutrality. President of Turkmenistan, Kurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, had paid a visit to Azerbaijan on 11th March 2020 during the pandemic, and at that time, Azerbaijan was infected with 34 cases of COVID and 1 death. So far, there has been no statement from Turkmenistan, no statement was observed from Turkmenistan on the current imbroglio in the region. Uzbekistan, whose President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has been enthusiastic about easing tensions in Central Asia and increasing cooperation in the region, has called Azerbaijan and Armenia to end hostilities as soon as possible and start negotiations. And Uzbekistan is presiding over the Commonwealth of Independent States and reaffirms the importance of strengthening friendship, good neighborliness, and mutual trust. So each are the peaceful resolution of controversial issue in CIS strictly in accordance with international law. The recent development is on 15th of October 2020, Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Russia held a virtual meeting. This was the third meeting under the C5 plus Russia format. A statement by foreign ministers of the Central Asian states and the Russian Federation on strategic areas of cooperation was adopted by the 6 countries. However, it does not mention about the situation in South Caucasus, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, or refers to Armenia or Azerbaijan. Just briefly about the, as we discussed, the relationship between Azerbaijan and Iran, and also said that it is not a clash on clash of civilization lines. So the conflict is producing interesting combinations where Azerbaijan is supported by Turkey, Pakistan, and Israel, while Armenia has cordial relations with Iran and is an ally of Russia. Following the Treaty of Turkmenchay between Tsarist Russia and Persia, the area of Azerbaijani people got divided into 2 parts, one under Russia and one under Persia. In Iran, there are 2 provinces. In Iran, there are 2 provinces with the name of Azerbaijan. One is East Azerbaijan, as Tabriz its capital, and West Azerbaijan as Urumia its capital. So there is tendency in Iran to consider Azerbaijan as a part of Iran. Azeris also constitute Iran's largest ethnic minority, estimated to be 15 to 20 million, which is about half of the population of Azerbaijan, which is about 10 million. So there are more Azeris in Iran than in Azerbaijan. Azeris in Iran are well integrated into the society and have a strong presence in security establishment and business. Nevertheless, the Azeri people feel they have their own identity. They have also accused the government of discrimination on linguistic and political lines. Further, Iran is under sanctions for a long time, and the Iranian people are facing the hardships, including Azeris in Iran, while in neighboring Azerbaijan, the Azeris are relatively in a better economic condition. In recent days, reportedly, there were protests in some of Iran's big Azeri-speaking cities, including Tabriz, Urumiyeh, Ardabil, and Zanjan. Demonstrators allegedly called for the liberation of Karabakh, and expressed anger over rumors that Iran has sent trucks of military aid to Armenia. Iran, in a statement, said that it is closely and worriedly monitoring the military clash between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It also called on the two sides to exercise restraint and demanded an immediate end to the clashes and the launch of dialogue. Iran also offered to employ all of its capacities to help establish a ceasefire and start negotiations. Now about India, South Caucasus. Just in 5 minutes. So the last two chapters of Ambassador Malhotra's book gives the details of India's connection with the region, including in cultural, commerce, trade areas. In the past, before and during the early Christian era, and as well as during the medieval period, people from the subcontinent and from South Asia were connected with each other through trade, travel, and even marriages. There are references to the presence of Indian settlements in the region, and the important thing is that the presence was from across the subcontinent, as it is confirmed by the presence of Multani Karvansarai and also Tamil manuscripts. India and South Caucasus have a strong cultural connection. Nizami Ganjavi, a city in Azerbaijan, is one of the famous poets of Caucasus. He initiated what is called Khamsa Sarai. Subsequently, numerous poets tried to emulate his path. Two of the most successful are Amir Khosrow of India, writing in Persian or Hindavi, and secondly, Ali Sher Nawai of Central Asia, writing in Uzbek. His style also had impact on Indian Sufi and Bhakti. The book refers to Sarmad, who is buried in Delhi, who was from Armenia. And currently, despite non-Persian speaking area, the South Caucasus, Amir Khosrow is popular in the region. And there is a strong connection, soft power connection between India and the region. In the days of independence of South Caucasus in early 90s, India was also passing through a difficult phase politically and economically. It was a phase of short-lived governments at the center in Delhi. There were protests for and against implementation of reservation. The country was gripped with Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Economically also, India had lost its largest trading partner in the form of USSR, and the immediate attention was diverted towards the Gulf, the first Gulf War, as a region where India had big stake. On the other hand, South Caucasus, as was discussed by the speaker, faced internal instability, long phase of consolidation, and so the both sides adopted inward approach, and the priority of Caucasian nations was also towards developing relations with the West. So the book mentions how to improve relations with connectivity, and also there are potential in defense areas. I will come to the conclusion now. So the contentious region of South Caucasus is once again in news, and it is about fighting, deaths and destruction. Many children, women and young people have lost their lives, and there has been vast destruction of property on both sides. Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh or Armenia cannot be blamed alone for the current fight in the South Caucasus. It is a collective failure. The involved parties, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Russia, Turkey, OSCE, Minsk chairs, cannot escape from partial responsibility for the hardships faced by the common people in the region. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan have used and abused the conflict for political advantages. In Azerbaijan, the internally displaced people, despite 30 years, have not yet given a decent livelihood and the living condition, though the country has economic capability to do so. Probably, providing them a better living condition would deprive Azerbaijan side a pressure lever. As the global political and economic pivots are moving from the west towards Eurasia, and the overland trade gaining renewed traction due to multiple connectivity initiatives, the significance of corridors is going to increase. The Caucasus region is an important connectivity corridor for transit of goods, movement of energy, and cyber communication. In the conflict of smaller countries, the benefit is for larger stakeholders. The imbroglio reminds of the lessons from Panchtantra story of third party benefiting from the fight between two weaker sides. Neighboring Russia, besides working to bring peace in the region, also supplies weapons to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Israel and Turkey are selling weapons, and then there will be contracts for reconstruction and development. There seems to be no easy solution to the imbroglio unless both sides make concessions and show flexibility. International organizations and multilateral initiatives and regional governments have been trying for many years to provide solution to the problem, but ultimately the conflicting parties have to make a move. They should first prepare their people for the necessity of peace and stability in the region. From India's perspective, both Central Asia and South Caucasus hold promising potential in terms of trade, investment, and connectivity. The international North-South transport corridor needs to be implemented at the earliest. A joint, comprehensive vision for the Eurasian region would be immensely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zafar. This was very comprehensive overview that you gave and very concrete suggestions also that you have made, apart from culling out the important aspects from the book of Ambassador Malhotra. We have now some questions, but one question I would like to put to Ambassador Achal Malhotra, and this is somewhat that some people might accuse him of being preferential towards Armenia, because you were ambassador there in your book, and it is commonly said that ambassadors usually suffer from localitis. So do you think your assessment on Armenia's role and quest is somewhat biased? No military or territorial objectives in Armenia. Secondly, you have taken lots of pain to explain the situation and predicament, but what kind of an eventual solution personally do you see, having worked there, lived there, and following the developments in the countries in the region? These are the questions. Rest we will come back to the other questions to next week.
Thank you, Anil. First of all, let me clarify that I have tried to be as objective as possible. And if I have sounded speaking on behalf of Armenia, then it seems that somewhere I have not been able to express myself very correctly. You see, fact of the matter is, we can see it from the facts of the last 30 years. How do you explain otherwise that we received 3 heads of states from Armenia and sent our vice president twice to that country, and we have a huge, historical linkages with Armenia, whereas with Azerbaijan, absolutely no high-level contact, absolutely no visits, no exchanges, and so is also the case with Georgia. So when I say our relationship with the 3 countries uneven, and I'm only making a statement of fact that if you measure it by the yardstick of the institutional mechanisms, or even the number of MOUs and agreements that we have signed with that with these countries, Armenia automatically comes to occupy position number 1. And this is not it's not just because I serve there as ambassador. I was also ambassador to Georgia, by the way, and I was visiting Georgia almost every month. And I still don't know why are we so hung up on Russia's sensitivities towards. We could at least open with something which I also recommended, at least a consulate in Tbilisi, when they have already established a full-fledged embassy here in New Delhi. So I think so much so about the bias. And sorry, what was your second, Anil? second question. Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
I'm sorry, there was some problem with my connection. Sorry.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
Anil, I answered your first question, no bias. I have tried to be very objective and I have explained why I think so. What was part two of your question?
Well, what exactly you think can be done now that we have gone through the problems?
Yeah, as everybody else has said, it's a very extremely complicated scenario when nobody is wanting to make any compromises whatsoever. Azerbaijan is at best willing to give some autonomy, and Nagorno-Karabakh is not willing to settle down for anything less than full independence. Now the question is, I may again be accused of being biased towards Nagorno-Karabakh. But you see, fact of the matter is, even if we have all the respect for the concept of territorial integrity, let's look at the history. First of all, the creation of Nagorno-Karabakh, ethnically, a Christian community-dominated territory, on the territory of Muslim majority Azerbaijan, and in a matter that it came close to Armenia but did not share borders, it was a flawed decision. In fact, on 4th of July, 1921, it was decided to make it a part of Armenia. But on 5th of July, supposedly on orders from Joseph Stalin, who was from Georgia, a decision was taken to make it a part of Azerbaijan. But then for next 70 years, Nagorno-Karabakh made repeated requests to central authorities in Moscow to merge it with Armenia, but that was not agreed to. Now, in 1991, if everybody was given the opportunity and right to become independent, I think the question of territorial integrity should not have been so predominantly applied, and South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and even Nakhichevan, whosoever wanted to be independent should have been allowed to become independent. But now it has down the line 30 years. And by the way, if Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence could be, immediately recognized by the USA and many other Western countries, what is the problem with Nagorno-Karabakh being granted independence? But then that's the core issue. Unless there is a compromise seems very difficult, and even the Armenian Prime Minister has very recently said, well, it's very unlikely that for next several months we may not be able to begin addressing this through diplomatic, deliberations. So that's where we stand today, unfortunately.
Thank you. And there is another question for you, Ambassador, and that is by one Ani Yeremyan. And he says that as Turkey is apparently supporting Azerbaijan, both politically or made to the region, do you think the fact is completely building a narrative beyond Artsakh or Northern Karabakh in mind of the neo-Pan-Turkism agenda?
Well, I think Turkey getting involved itself is likely to complicate the situation. In fact, even though the co-chairs, the three big co-chairs of the Minsk group have not been able to resolve the conflict, somehow they were able to manage it, and Russia was able to, control the situation from time to time. But now Turkey getting involved, and Turkey has all along supported Azerbaijan, but now getting actively involved is, in my opinion, going to complicate the matters. And most of the observers feel that Turkey's decision to step in is guided by Erdogan's ambitions to assume the leadership of the Islamic world, and which Erdogan is taking the path of flexing military muscles, whether it is vis-a-vis Greece in the Mediterranean, or now trying to take over the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh or elsewhere, or accelerating, its criticism of India on its Kashmir issue. So yes, it is going to make very, very complicated, and it's part of a larger design.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, there was a question from Mr. Sharma. Is the region integral part of Azerbaijan or Armenia? It has been answered in detail, and that is what the whole book roughly is all about, and the conflict is all about. Now, I will request Professor Pandey or Dr. Zafar, to one of them, to take on this question. It is about, kindly comment, is it not similar to Kashmir from the Pakistani perspective? This is Manjeet Sodhi. Like Kashmir is claimed by Pakistan as it is majority Muslim, Nagorno-Karabakh, though a part of Azerbaijan, is claimed by Armenia as majority of its population is Armenian.
Can I comment?
Yeah, this is for you. Yes, please.
All right. Now, it's really interesting that there is more similarity in Azerbaijan and India's interest on the issue of self-determination, which Ambassador Malhotra talked about. Both Azerbaijan and India do not support self-determination. They would rather go by territorial integrity of countries, non-violation of territorial integrity. So this is interesting that in a certain way, our position coincides more with Azerbaijan. This despite the fact that we are seen as supporting Armenia. But if you see the nuances, you would realize that India really never supported Armenia's demand for national self-determination in Nagorno-Karabakh. On that issue, India has been very circumspect, has been very cautious. So this is one observation on that. I suppose there are a few other questions I could see in the chat box. Yes. Do you want me to take them up?
Yeah, okay. It's about the Russian military base in Gumri.
Yeah, Russian military base. Well, I explained Russia's close connection with Armenia, and they have a military base, we know, Gimri. But apart from that, Armenia is also part of PSTO, the Russian-sponsored military alliance system. Armenia is also part of Eurasian Economic Union. And of course, one can go back to history and say that traditionally, Russia in the 18th, 19th century, the heyday of nationalism, especially 19th century, Russia has always tried to champion the cause of Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire and the cause of Orthodox Christians especially, and Armenia is Orthodox Christian. So, quote unquote, old hostilities between Christians, Orthodox Christians and Turks, and Russia's fight against the Turks and Armenia's charge of Armenian genocide. So there are historical reasons as well, which bring Russia and Armenia together. But I'm sure these historical, cultural, religious reasons would not have mattered if in the present context, Russia's geopolitical interests did not converge with Armenia, which is overwhelmingly dependent on Russia, both militarily and for energy supplies and trade, Russia being the largest trading partner of Armenia. But at the same time, Azerbaijan in many ways is a bigger catch for Russia. I mean, the Europeans are also after Azerbaijan. Russia would not want it to go Georgia way and become openly anti-Russia. So it's a very fine balancing and a complex geopolitical game that Russia is engaged in South Caucasus. And we have to wait and see. Earlier, they were able to broker peace. in 94, in 2016. In between also, they have regularly invited leaders from the two countries to come to Moscow. Even in the present conflict, we know on 10th of October, the foreign ministers of the two countries had a meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Subsequently also, they had almost reached an agreement on ceasefire, but then both accused each other of violating the ceasefire. So it's a very complex situation. 1 or 1.5 minutes I'll take on India and Caucasus. Ambassador Malhotra, without using the term paradox, has tried to bring out a paradox in India's interaction with South Caucasus. The paradox is that on the one hand, we have a history of very close cultural as well as trade relations, and large number of Indians were present in South Caucasus as recently as 18th century, and some of the caravansarais, including the Atishgah, the fire temple, is testimony to it. But the paradox is that in post-1991 period, in the current period, when communication, transport has improved vastly, India's presence in South Caucasus is negligible. And as Ambassador Malhotra says, we do not have a policy, but then Ambassador Trigunayat would assert that having no policy is also a policy. One more point about, I forgot it, the large Armenian diaspora in many of the countries, including Russia, including US, France, and of course 1.5 billion remittances that Armenian diaspora in Russia sends. So in that sense also, Russia is backbone of Armenian economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Ambassador Malhotra, before you take on, you can do a rejoinder to this, but there is a question for you also. Of course, the UN Secretary General has appealed for calm and everything, and then UNSC also considered it yesterday, day for yesterday. Now, there is a question from J.K. Sharma that what was our stand, Ambassador Achal, towards UNSC resolutions on the conflict? So you can join the two. Yeah.
Well, I think if we look at it historically, in the 1993, we had made a statement which was quite explicit when we said we expressed our serious concern over the fight in Nagorno-Karabakh and also a large-scale ingress of the Armenians into the Azeri territories, and we had expressed our support for the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan in almost so many words. But subsequently, we have adopted a sort of a neutral stance, except once in 2008, there was a UN resolution moved by Azerbaijan, which was on the occupied, titled as occupied territories of Azerbaijan, in which we had sided with USA, France, and few other countries and voted against that resolution. But since then, our emphasis has been, and our statements are more or less, balanced, neutral. We have been calling upon the two sides to show restraint, find a, peaceful resolution through negotiation. So we have adopted a kind of a middle path. We don't want to be seen endorsing either the principle of territorial integrity or the principle of right to self-determination.
Thank you.
And Anil, if I may avail of this opportunity to half a minute about India's policy on the region. You also mentioned, and Professor Sanjay Pandey also referred to it. You see, I think, let me clarify. I'm not saying that India has no policy towards the region. Let me quickly read out what I said. I said India does not have a publicly articulated South Caucasus policy, unlike, for instance, Central Asia Connect or Neighborhood First. And then I quickly go and add on, probably one is not needed, considering that three countries in the region have chartered a distinct foreign policy course. India will therefore need to deal with each one of them separately on merits. In other words, there is a policy that to deal with them separately, with each one of them, on the basis of the merit.
Thank you,
I'm not saying
Ambassador.
there is no policy.
No. Thank you, Ambassador. And I know that in the very last lines of your book, also you talk about the same.
Yeah,
so thank you very much. Yes.
221.
Yes.
I think you have read my book very thoroughly. Thank you.
Dr. Sengupta, would you like to add to any of the questions, any of your comments before
I
we?
don't think there were any questions that are directly addressed to me, but there was a question on whether this would lead to a new Cold War. I would think that there are many other global issues today which, if you could talk about a new Cold War, would lead to it. This, of course, is it's a troubling issue in the sense that it is happening in a region very significant, both in terms of politics as well as oil and natural gas kind of various other economic issues also. But there are so many other global issues that are coming up and that it could probably add to it, which is why there is an effort to bring it to some kind of resolution.
Thank you, Dr. Sengupta. Thank you very much. Now that we have come to the end and there are no more questions, I would like to once again congratulate Ambassador Achal Malhotra for this seminal book. It is exceptionally good for reference value for anyone who doesn't know much and wants to understand about it. Of course, as Professor Pandey said, that perhaps one or two ideas could be further explored, especially about the nationalism of the times. But the history can't be rewritten. I mean, and we have seen that everybody is dealing with these injustices of history or the leaders of that particular time, be it in the Second World War, thereafter, or the disintegration of Ottoman or Soviet or Persian. I am indeed, it has enriched me further. In fact, I always used to read a little bit, but this one has given me a very comprehensive outlook, especially the discussion with the three panelists, including Dr. Zafar. And I'm grateful to you all for taking your time and sharing this view. And Ambassador Malhotra, of course, we'll look forward to reading more of your books, but definitely I'm going to read it once again to be more sure, even though I've just written an article last week on this. But thank you and wish you all the very best. And I hope more and more people read your book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Zafar.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, there is one question from Ambassador P.S. Raghavan.
Yes. I have not seen it.
Yeah. In the chat box, when the book will be available in Kindle and other e-book format?
Dr. Zafar can answer this.
Okay. Hope we will have it soon, sir.
Dr. Zafar, now over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. As we come to the end of the webinar, it is my pleasure to present the vote of thanks on behalf of the Council. I would like to express my gratitude to all, the distinguished Chair, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, author, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, and eminent speakers, Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey and Dr. Anita Sengupta, for their observations and responses to the queries from the participants in our audience. My special thanks to all our invited participants for their active participation in the event, and also thanks to the leadership at the Council, Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, Shri Shomen Bagchi, Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahavar, for their guidance and support to the event, and thanks to Director Research Dr. Nivedita Ray for her help in conducting the program. Special gratitude for the IT team and professionals without whose support the program would not have been possible in the current situation. And once again, congratulations to Ambassador Malhotra for authoring a wonderful book on the South Caucasus issues. And also thanks to DG ICWA for commencing the work, and also the Macmillan Education for the publication. I hope that this book is translated in other Indian languages and also languages in South Caucasus. Finally, I thank all the participants and viewers who joined us today and announced the end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you.